Welcome to the Overflow Worship Podcast, where we serve and support leaders so you can serve and support your local church.
Well, I am so excited to share a rebroadcast with you today. We are playing an episode that was just really special. It was my interview with Hope Darst, and we're playing it this week because Hope is going to be with us this Friday and Saturday at the Overflow Worship Conference in Wilmer, Minnesota. If you don't have your tickets yet, get them ASAP at overflowworship.com. Join me and Hope and Clay Scroggins and Mike Harland and so many more. But tune in here. If you missed it the first time, here it is again, my interview with Hope Darst. So I would love to kick it off. Just tell everybody a little bit about you, whatever you want to share about life or family and ministry, and just kind of where God has you right now.
Yeah. Well, currently I'm sitting at my house in Nashville, like you said, with my kids running in the background because it's summer and, hey moms, we're all in this together.
Yes.
Just juggling it all. But I've lived in Nashville for 21 years. So it's home to me because it's the longest I've lived anywhere. I was born and raised in Kentucky. My dad was a minister. And, my mom joked that when she had me on a Wednesday and by Friday I was on a pew, and I haven't left since. So I have been a church girl from my first breath. It was just in me that I was going to be in church, and church culture has really basically kind of built the framework for my life. I just was a pastor's kid and a church kid. And then I fell in love with the local church really young because I was serving in it because my family was there every second of the day. Yes. But then as I got older and when I was 19, I had a radical encounter with Jesus. Even though I had grown up in a believing home, there is a real, for some people, they pray that prayer of salvation very young, and it really, really goes deeply into their hearts, kind of like the parable of the weeds. And it doesn't get stolen away by the cares of life or things. But for me, I prayed that prayer very young, and it was very sincere and it was very real, but I didn't understand lordship. And so it wasn't until I was 19 and I was pretty much kind of living my life how I wanted to live it, not really caring if it served the Lord or not, getting my identity in everything that could be other than God. Guys, my talents, my giftings, just anything that would make me feel value. And it wasn't coming from Jesus, and it wasn't working. I was struggling with an eating disorder. I was very, very depressed, and I was just in a string of unhealthy relationships. And this one relationship ended abruptly, and it just sent me spiraling because, when you build your life on anything other than Christ, it really is sinking sand. So when it falls apart, you fall apart. Yeah. And that's what happened when I was 19. And I had a beautiful friends that lived in Nashville, Tennessee. They were believers, and there was just something on their lives that just looked and smelled different than other people that I'd known that confessed to love Jesus. But there was a level of just freedom and joy and life on them that was so attractive. And I remember just basically saying to my parents, I don't really understand how God fits into my life, but I know that he needs to fit into my life. And I don't know what that looks like or how to do it. And if I don't figure it out, I think my life's not going to actually end up well. Can I go stay with this family for the summer and just be around them? And of course they were kind and opened their doors. And I moved here when I was 19, and Jesus met me in the most honestly radical kind of way in the back row of a pew here in Nashville. And I just ran to the altar at the end, and I was like, Jesus, I'm all in. I know you are who you say you are, but I've not given you my heart, my mind, my soul, my opinions, my ideas, my dreams, all of it. And I'm giving it to you now. And whatever you want, for no matter what it costs, you have my whole heart. And it marked my life, right? Cause you pray that kind of prayer at 19 and you don't really know what that means. And you don't really understand. I think on some levels, hey girl, get ready, because you're going to have to do some things to live that out that you weren't thinking about when you were 19. But it was the greatest decision I've ever made. And it's still to this day at 40 years old, it is the decision that changed my life. He is the person that changed my life. And everything has been marked by that. And so over the years, that tiny prayer of God, whatever you want, whatever the cost, wherever you lead, I'll follow you. it has led me in the craziest of places, like just everything from moving to Nashville to having crazy jobs. I like delivered subpoenas. Not a great idea for a young 19-year-old girl. If you work for a law firm, I just really want to encourage you, don't hire a single young girl to deliver
Oh
subpoenas.
my goodness.
It was terrible.
Oh
And
my goodness.
very quickly, I was like, this does not feel like a safe job. I feel like I should find another job.
This was not a wise choice on my behalf.
Yeah. So, I mean, I was a banquet server at Opryland. I was a nanny. I was a terrible nanny because I was young and I didn't really understand what raising children, really required of you. And eventually all these odd and end jobs landed me working for the Gospel Music Association here in Nashville, which if you remember them, they were like Seminar in the Rockies and Dove Awards. And it was back in the heyday. And so like I got to go on staff there and I was like coordinating all of that with the artists and, booking flights for artists to perform on the Dove Awards and all these kinds of different things. And that eventually led to being a background singer for Natalie Grant. Like just my whole life just kind of took all these twists and turns. But the one thing that was really consistent was that I was always plugged into the local church. I was faithfully committed to be not just attending, but serving in my local church. And that, again, was a variety of things, everything from kids ministry to setting up chairs to ultimately being involved in worship teams. Because I grew up in the culture that just said, bring your talents to the storehouse and like whatever you have, whatever's in your hands, whatever you're good at it, go and let that thing be something that can help the local church, like build the kingdom of God. And so for me, I was really good at singing. Like that was one thing I knew how to do. And so I was, the girl that was like, hey, I'll sing in the choir or I'll go, serve on the worship team and the kids, youth and all that kind of stuff. And so, I'm sure in the early years, it was really just my ego that just wanted to be like, hoping I could get a solo or something. Yeah. But over time and God, like, refining my character and different things. I found myself at 25, newly married, coming off the road from being a background singer and still serving in my local church and thinking, I'm going to be an artist now. Like, I'm going to pursue this thing. And God just so, like he has consistently in my life, very clearly, was like, that is not what I have for you in this season. And are you willing to lay that dream down and really follow me, no matter if it even means walking away from the thing that you thought you were supposed to do your whole life? Because everything in my life up until that point was like trying to build to this moment of like pursuing being an artist. And this felt like the moment. And God was like, no. And long story short, over a period of time, God really redirected my heart and really began to birth in me a passion for worship in the local church and serving the worship department. And long story short, I ended up going on staff at my local church here in Nashville. And I was on staff for just shy of a decade, being everything from the coordinating girl who like sent out the PCO emails to helping print lyrics for choir, rehearsals, to leading the band, leading the worship team, helping write Easter productions and Christmas productions, you name it, I did it. Like that was the course of my life. And it changed me because it was such an unexpected pivot. Even though I grew up in the church, I never thought about it being vocational ministry for me. I always just wanted to go work in, the marketplace. I wanted to go be an artist, sign on a big label and, kind of do all those things. And God just had a different plan. And it was the greatest redirection that God could have done, because I just think there's something about whether you're serving or you're on staff in a local church. If you spend any time there, give 6 months and God will start to deal with your character. He'll start to deal with weaknesses that you maybe have a blind spot to and you don't see. And it should be the greatest place for us to actually grow in our character, mature in our walk with Christ, and actually become who God wants us to be on every level, like character that really honors God. But oftentimes that comes with like, it's pricking, serving alongside people can prick at the very things that are, areas that you don't want to confront, areas you don't want to deal with. Yes. And I did it wrong. I'm going to say I did it wrong. Like the way I led and the way more wrong than I got right. But God in his grace and his kindness, he is someone who tends to let us have second chances to get things right that we didn't get right
Yes.
the first time. And so in this season of life, in 2013, I ended up transitioning off staff there at that church. And it was just a season I could just tell, like, I'd been there for a really long time, been at the church for almost 14 years at that point. And I'd grown up. I was literally like 19 to 33. I was now a mom. I had children. We owned businesses. A lot had just changed. And some of the things that my husband and I felt like were where God was calling us for the future, it just was a shift. There was no big thing, just a transition. And we just stepped out in faith and we're just like, okay, God, whatever you want for us next, we're willing to do that. And it ended up leading us to a little basement here in Nashville with an Australian couple who were just hungry for a fresh encounter with Jesus. And we were hungry. We'd been doing ministry for a really long time. And I think it's easy to do ministry for years and kind of become unaware that you need a season of just being ministered to and a season of rest and recalibration and allowing God to just really restore anything that has gotten dry or has gotten out of alignment unintentionally. And that really was what the season became for us. And out of that, God just was really kind to allow me a really long season of just hiddenness, of just serving again the local church, but now as a volunteer, not on staff, just being someone who is just running lyrics, changing like the labels on water bottles from like the Kirkland label to like our church label and loving every second of it. And eventually that led into songwriting because I eventually joined the worship team there as the church began to grow. As the worship team began to grow, we started writing songs. Eventually out of that came a song called Peace Be Still. That song has taken on a life of its own. It opened up a world of writing for the local church, which I'm now just so grateful that God's even expanded my heart for the local church in a new way to express that. And so I find myself at 40, a mom of two, running several businesses with my husband, still deeply, deeply planted into the local church, which is my passion, and being able to pastor both through songs and pastor people one-on-one in the real, everyday life. And I just had the fortune, a fortunate situation that about 18 months ago, God just opened a door for me to sign a record deal with a label here in town who could really come alongside me in a unique way, knowing that really my passion is for the church and yet still wanted to be able to get music into a greater space that we felt like I just was kind of limited on my own. And so I find myself here doing crazy interviews that I did never expected. Not crazy, but it's crazy to me that anybody wants to talk to me and hear my story. And and watching God take my heart for the local church beyond just my local church. That's all I've ever known. It's just serving my local church. And what I've seen in the last couple of years is God going, that I've given you a heart for my bride. And my bride is more than just your body. And so while my heart beats for my body here in my local church, it really does beat for the bride in a greater sense. And I feel like, I'm in my 40s and this is a great season for me to kind of step into that mothering role and be able to look at the generation that's coming up behind me and do what, the New Testament talks about, that the older women would pour into the younger women, that the older worship leaders would pour into the younger worship leaders and really talk about what we've gotten wrong, what we wish we would have done different, what we see as really good and fruitful things right now, and what we see as, maybe signposts of, hey, we got to maybe work on this for a future generation to make sure that we're raising up not performers, but actually priests. And the difference in understanding what that means for a next generation, because I don't know. So that's me in a nutshell.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I love getting to sit on this end of hearing people's stories because it's like I get to just get a glimpse into what God is doing all over the place. And it's just a constant reminder that He is working and moving all the time, everywhere, in a very specific, very just intentional way. Yeah. It's all for His purposes and His plan. And it's just so incredible to me. It blows me away every time. And I just, what I love hearing and just kind of like getting this tiny little glimpse, like you said, you in a nutshell, but because there's so much more to your story, as you know, we could go on and on, but
I could talk for days.
yes, but I just see like so much surrender and how much surrender that must have required of you over the years of like laying down what maybe your idea was and your timeline or your, fill in the
Oh,
blank,
yeah.
and just a consistent surrender back to that prayer, right?
Yep.
At age 19, which, side note, I think that is just, isn't that just like the Lord to bring us to a place when we're bold enough to pray that prayer? Whereas now we're like, ooh.
Yeah. Now it's like, I'm going to be real careful with how I word this, Lord, because I
It's
know you're
like,
going to hold me accountable to it.
yeah. Like, I'm not going to pray for patience because you're going to give me the opportunity to exercise patience, like my
Yes.
wisdom. I'm just
Yes,
kidding. But,
your 19-year-olds have praised that prayer, and all you see it through is the tunnel of like all of the glittery gold,
yes.
good things that would mean for your life. You don't pray that prayer with the wisdom of a 4-year-old that goes, that's going to require a lot of self denying,
Yes.
and that's not going to feel great. And
Yep.
yet, isn't it funny? Like now at 40, the crazy part though is that like I understand what actually happens when you
Mhm.
die to self and the
Yes.
gold that comes from that. And so
Yes.
now you willingly do it. It doesn't mean
Absolutely.
it's less painful or it's less difficult or it doesn't, just honestly just destroy your flesh in every million kind of way that it can. But
Yes.
you have now the history with God to
Mhm.
know that every season where you were willing, where I was willing to honestly lay down what I wanted for what God was asking of me, it
Mhm.
has only been to my benefit every
Yeah.
time. Even in the places that in the moment it would have been easy. And there were times I was shaking my fist at God and just being like,
Mm.
how could you? Like, how I asked you, I begged of you, don't
Yeah.
do this. Don't ask me to do this. Don't let this be the outcome of this situation. And yet, it would go in a way that I didn't want it to go, or what was asked of me was what I didn't want to do. And yet, God faithfully showed up in every one of those places and either brought deeper freedom, more
Mhm.
maturity, healing, revelation, correction. Like it
Yeah.
was always to my benefit. And therefore, there was always good in all of it, the losses,
Absolutely.
the mistakes, the failures, the disappointments. His goodness was still wrapped up in it. It's just, you sometimes have to, I always tell people, you have to commit to the long journey.
Yeah.
If you just want to do the short journey or the shortcut version of relationship with Jesus, when things get tough or things are hard or you face the losses and the difficult things that we are going to face in this life, you'll jump ship.
Mhm.
But if you stay on the long road of commitment to Jesus, your perspective will change. As the
Mhm.
years go by, you will look back at really difficult moments and still be able to see God's hand even in it. It doesn't
Mhm.
mean that his hand orchestrated what was difficult or
Yeah.
painful, but you'll see the hand that wants to come alongside you and rescue you and comfort you and heal you and
Mhm.
restore you. And it changes your perspective then as the years go by and you keep following Christ and you just kind of go, I don't care what's up ahead. Like, I know
Yep.
you're going to be with me.
Mhm.
Here we go.
Here we go. Yes. Yes. And it's so beautiful that we can stand at this season in our lives and look back. And even
Yeah.
though it was hard, it's like, I wouldn't change it because it's
No.
given me like the strength or
Yes.
like you said, maturity or whatever the case may be that I wouldn't have had otherwise.
Right.
And I think, looking back on my life, and tell me if you feel the same way, but if I would have been given to steward the things I have now to
Gosh.
steward when I was 21 and thought that like, let's do this,
Yep.
I would have crushed me, like
It would have destroyed me. Like, I think, I come from a long line. My parents were really first generation believers, kind of in the history of my family. I think there's a couple, maybe like 3 generations back that were believers. So they were really kind of figuring this out really for the first time. What does it mean to raise a family intact? Because part of that being first generation believers means there was divorce everywhere. Like everyone is divorced. And, I can see now, like if God, if he just been like, I'm just going to give you whatever you want at 19, I probably would be divorced today, because that would have fed me just right into that lane of everything's about me. Everything's about what I want, when I want it, how I want it. Like it would have created a monster of selfishness, which doesn't work so great in marriage, doesn't work so great in parenting, doesn't work so great in character building. And I see all the pitfalls. One of the things I've been very open about in my journey is I've dealt with anxiety. I've dealt with depression over the years. Actually, when I was 19, the depression really lifted. So that has not been a struggle for me since that moment at 19 when Jesus really came in and healed so much. But anxiety has been something that I've dealt with a lot throughout the years, and fear. And so, I can only imagine you put yourself down a road that's full of really difficult decisions and just traps that I think it would have just created a monster of more anxiety, more fear, more whatever. And God loves me. He actually loves me to the degree that a parent loves a child and will say, I know you want that right now, but it's going to destroy you in your heart and in your mind. And I just can't in good conscience let you do that, knowing I know what it's going to do to you right now, versus having 21 years of walking with the Lord and the Lord then being able to go, okay, now we can do this hand in hand. Because I know that I know that your identity is in me. I know that you understand how to combat anxiety through my word, through my presence. You are tethered to me now. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, and so it doesn't mean that and I also don't think it's just some reward. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't think God gives it to us certain things in certain seasons. Like, okay, now you did a good job and now I'm going to give it to you.
Yes.
It's not like that. God, I think, writes things over our lives and has things that we are each individually called to do, called to partner with him to advance the kingdom of God. And all along the while, he's ready and willing to hand those things to us the minute he knows that we're capable of carrying it without it crushing us. And it's not necessarily just because I don't love that theology that goes like, get it all right and then God gives it to you, or get it all wrong and then he
takes it away.
I'm a parent. I don't look at my kids that way. I'm ready and waiting to hand off to them everything that I see that will be good for them and things that I know that they're going to be great at. I would give it to them right now if I thought they were ready. Yeah. But a parent has wisdom to go, I'm not going to hand you car keys right now. You're 13. You cannot drive this car. But I'm not waiting for her to prove that she's good enough to drive the car.
Yeah.
I'm just waiting for there to be a little bit more maturity, a little bit more, trust, a little bit more, I think you're making good choices. So let's try this out. And knowing she might even mess up. She's probably going to get in a wreck, right? Like that's just the reality of kids. I got so many wrecks when I turned 16. But that, think about it like from God's perspective. God knows when he puts things in our hands, we are still going to mess it up. We're still going to get it wrong. There's still going to be a learning curve. That doesn't keep him from handing us good things. He just is really wise. He's really wise about when he allows us to step into things if we allow him. But a lot of times we're rushing in and we're going, oh God, you don't really know what you're thinking. I'm going to do this anyways. Like, I know I'm ready. And notoriously that does not end well.
Yeah.
At least for me, at least when I see in the Bible, at least when I see in other people's lives.
Same. Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And so all of the time that you've spent serving in the church, like as whether it's volunteering or it's on staff or it's, changing water bottle labels or printing lyrics, I would imagine in that process, it was a constant dying to self as well, of just like, I'm just here to serve. And for you, with your gift being singing, so for you, it's being like, I'm just laying down my singing because that's, what God is asking me to do right now. And so what have you learned through that you now impart to people that like
Yes.
you're saying, the more mature women teach the
Oh,
young
yeah.
women. So what are you telling the young worship leaders that are
Mm,
coming up? How can they step into serving with grace and
yeah.
with maturity?
I would say, just from my own experience, I went on staff very young. I
Mhm.
was 25 and I knew nothing. Like I just was as clueless as could be. And I think because there was still a tension in my own heart, like even though I was really walking out obedience and I was walking out faith by being willing to not pursue becoming an artist and serve the Lord, there was still like unmet desires in my heart that I was still kind of wrestling through. And I think I, like many people, quickly fell into the trap of this place within the church now is going to fulfill that thing that I didn't
Mm.
do that I thought I was going to do. So
Yeah.
it's giving me the outlet to sing. It's giving me the outlet to be seen. It's giving me the outlet to feel, valuable, and it's giving me an outlet to feel, just significant.
Mm.
And that is really dangerous because
Yeah.
the reality is Christ and Christ alone is supposed to be the thing that makes us feel significant.
Mm.
And I think oftentimes, especially for those of us who have a really external talent of, singing, being a musician or an incredible orator that, can just preach the house down, we are constantly having to check, what are our motives? Why am I
Mhm.
doing this? Am I being performance oriented or am I being priestly? Because a priest, which is who we're called to be, God, because of Christ, we are now called, priests. That, the role of a priest when he would go into it was to minister to the Lord and minister to others. And he had to
Mhm.
make sure before he got into the presence of God that he was like a clean heart and clean mind. And there was some repentance. That meant there was like a real checking of the heart and checking of the motives. And I think, I know for me, one of the things that I easily fell into was performance mode. You
Mhm.
know, how did the worship go? Like, are my pastors pleased with how worship? How did I sound?
Yeah.
How was it executed? And is everyone happy? And, it was such a external validation. I was looking for external validation. I was looking for external excellence. I was looking for external, you name it.
Yeah.
But it's really clear. I mean, God's so clear that he cares about what is internal.
Mhm.
And I would say this isn't about being a worship leader. And I think that's the thing,
Yeah.
is that I don't even love just talking to worshipers because they're worshipers. I think what really needs to happen is that we start talking to people and calling them into becoming sons and daughters who really understand what it means to be priests, who actually care about being in the presence of God to minister to the heart of God, meaning my life on every level should be pleasing to the Lord. And it should have nothing to do with what's happening with my gifting or my talent. That should overflow from what is being built in intimacy with Jesus. Because all of the years that I cared about being just kind of in that trap of man pleasing and being performance oriented, what's funny is my senior pastor now, Pastor Henry Seeley, he saw me lead worship in that season. And I'll never forget, years later when we got to know each other, I didn't know that he'd seen me lead worship. And
Okay.
he said, it was obvious that you were gifted. It was obvious that you were anointed. He said, it was also obvious that you didn't carry authority because you were so trapped in a performance.
Mhm.
And because of that, it didn't impact the room. It wasn't shifting the room. It wasn't, people were encountering me. They weren't encountering Jesus.
Mhm.
And our job is to actually just set the table, get out of the
Mhm.
way, make a
Yeah.
seat for Jesus, and then let people feast in the presence of God at the table with Jesus. I'm just literally open the door, set the table, get out of the way, as
Mhm.
no matter what role I'm in. And I
Yeah.
think that's the thing that I saw different on this side of as being a volunteer, and that it happened to also be that I came off staff and then God did a really deep heart work and
Mhm.
really kind of working some of this out. And it was because I ended up being in a community of people who could care less whether or not I could lead worship.
Mhm.
They were really, really, really concerned with, is your heart really healthy? Because out of the heart, the mouth flows. And I think that is such a powerful scripture for worship leaders. It's not just what we're singing, it's what we're saying, it's what we're confessing, it's how we're treating others. It's what are we letting out of our mouths, and making sure that my heart was clean and pure before the Lord, that the number one thing in my heart was, Lord, I want to be pleasing unto you in every area of my life, especially the ones that no one sees.
Yeah.
So that when I may have the privilege to stand on a stage or stand in a room, because who cares if you're on stage or not, but just to stand in a room and lead people on your behalf in any capacity, I am much more concerned with who I've been in private than who I am in that moment, because that moment is never, ever, ever going to be the moment where I suddenly just become who I'm called to be. I become that when no one's looking. And that moment should be an overflow of what has been built in intimacy with Jesus. And it should be fruitful. It should look like patience and self-control and, righteousness and kindness and love and joy. It doesn't really matter. If I could be the greatest vocalist in the world and have all be anointed and called, but if I haven't learned how to please the heart of the Father, then none of that really matters. David was appointed an anointed king, and he still had to go live in a palace for 6 years to learn the culture on how to be kingly. And I think that is true for us, that we need to spend way more time learning how to be kingly, learning how to be priestly before Jesus, so that when we are in positions that we're called to be kings and we're called to be priests, we can actually lead with the heart of God and not with our own ideas and our own motives or our own, whatever. So that's what I would say.
I love that. It's so good, and such a powerful word of encouragement for everybody who is listening out there. It's just so good. And I think it's a great place to end our conversation for today. But, friends, everybody who's listening out there, just be encouraged today with everything that you heard. And I hope that you will take this and apply it to your lives. That, the only thing that matters, the number one thing that matters is what you are doing behind closed doors in those private moments. And then everything else is just an overflow out of that. And a good friend of mine always says, we can't lead people to a place that we haven't been and that we don't go frequently. And so may we all live with that in the forefront of our minds. Hope, thank you so much.
Oh my gosh. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Anytime. Just thank you for sharing your heart. And I'm just really grateful. And we look forward to having you with us in October.
Same. Can't wait to be there.
You've been listening to the Overflow Worship Podcast. If you enjoy our podcast, please take a moment and leave us a 5-star rating and a written review, which helps us reach more people. New episodes are released every other Monday. So until next time, thank you for listening.